This week we've got Jesus and we. We've been talking about this for a few weeks, and you saw in the video that they were talking about being irrationally generous. Irrationally generous. Irrationally. Without reason, without logic. That's what irrationally means. And see, what's funny is when I say the word generosity, probably most everybody in this room, your mind immediately goes to money. And you know why that is? Because you're an American. Really, that's why it is. That word actually, there is some to do with money when you talk about being generous. However, the actual word really has very little to do with generous. And see, it's our country and our culture and our way of living that actually makes our minds go to that when I say that word. But there's actually a much bigger and broader view of generosity. See, generosity, as defined, you know me and my Google, and I love to look up definitions of words and see what they mean. But as defined, it's the quality of being kind. The quality of being kind. Do you hear that? That has nothing to do with money, does it? The quality of being kind is actually a condition of the heart, isn't it? Yes. So that's the generosity we're going to speak about this morning, and how we're going to be irrationally generous. It's a condition of our heart. Really has very little to do with our money. Yes, money might fall behind and money might play into that, but it's a condition of our heart that we need to work on. So what we need to do is we need to take a look at this broader view of being generous, because there's lots of ways that we can be generous. We can be generous with each other, right? That's the one that we think about most often. Is that Danielle was praying this morning, and we're talking about our neighbors with flooding and all of the tragedy that's going on in Texas. That's the first thing that comes to our mind, is that type of generosity where we give of ourselves to help somebody else, right? Maybe you help somebody get out of their driveway, or, I'm from the north, and when the weather came, and anybody who's from the north, I know we have lots of northerners here, but up north, what you do is when this terrible weather comes and things like this happen, if you've got somebody next door stuck in the snow trying to get out of their driveway, everybody in the neighborhood comes together and pushes that car out of the snow, right, so they can get to work. That's the kind of generous we're talking about, is being generous with each other. Now, I want to take a look at a verse, because one of my favorite characters in the Bible was King David. And I have just learned to love him recently. And I just love this guy. It's just, there is so much to this character, and so much that reminds me of just us. Normal people, normal lives, normal struggles, and how he dealt with that. And I love King David for that. But I want you to take a look. You have an insert this morning. I have a lot of material here for you today. So get ready to carry a bunch of stuff home, because I got a lot of stuff I'm going to send you home with today. But you have an insert that has our scripture on it. And David was the writer of many of the Psalms. And after all of his triumphs and his struggles and his great days and his bad days with the Lord, he wrote some of these Psalms. And this is one of the Psalms that he wrote. It's Psalm 41. Now listen to David's words. Blessed are those who have regard for the weak. The Lord delivers them in times of trouble. The Lord protects them and preserves them, and they are counted among the blessed in the land. He does not give them over to the desires of their foes. The Lord sustains them on their sickbed and restores them from their bed of illness. And see, David, I like to know about the characters writing this, because so much of their personality comes out in their writings. And if you know King David, you know that he once slept in a cave and he once slept in a palace, didn't he, right? Two very different times in life. And at one point in his life, he was the picture of strength, wasn't he? And at another time in his life, he was the image of weakness. So he's actually lived a broad spectrum of life on both sides of the fence, almost, he did. And these are the words that he's saying. He's saying, blessed are those who have regard for the weak. For the weak. And who are the weak? The ones with less, right? And when you look at how far David traveled, and the words that he wants to leave with you in those Psalms, and one of the most important things he wants to tell you are to take care of each other. Blessed are those who are weak. And see, this generosity or this kindness to one another isn't just in the book of Psalms. It's actually all over the Bible. It's in Leviticus, it's in Deuteronomy, it's in Psalms, it's in Proverbs, and that's just the Old Testament. You move over to the New Testament, and you've got even Jesus himself speaking these words in Matthew, Mark, Luke. It's in Acts, it's in Corinthians, it's in Galatians, it's in 1 John, it's in 1 Timothy. This generosity with each other, this having the quality of kindness in our hearts for one another, right? So it's not just giving, but having that quality, and you can find those in those books. So that's one type of generosity, is being generous to each other, which is the one that we most often think of. Now, there's another type of generosity that we don't often think of, and that is our generosity to ourselves. And a lot of you are saying, wait, hold up, because we get caught up with this generosity to ourselves and being selfish, don't we? Don't we? Sometimes we're like, well, wait a minute, that means being selfish. Now, I want to take a look at selfish and what selfish actually means. Now, I want you to think about this, because what selfish means is that you completely disregard generosity to other people in effort to self-benefit. So that's what being selfish is you disregard each other in an effort to benefit yourself. Now, that's a much different thing than have a quality of a heart for yourself, right? The condition of your heart cares for yourself. Those are two very different things. See, we need to have kindness with ourselves. We need to be generous with ourselves. We need to be generous with forgiving ourselves, with giving ourselves mercy, with doing things that actually benefit our spirits, our lives, our well-being. So if you think about being generous to yourself in those ways, rather than being selfish, it's not being selfish. That would be self-serving. But being generous, like forgiveness, big thing, right? How many of us have held forgiveness against ourselves, withheld it, right? A lot of times we have an easier time forgiving other people than we do have forgiving ourselves for something. Years later, we're dealing with something that everybody's forgiven us for, but we still haven't forgiven ourselves. And that's the kind of generosity that we're looking for with ourselves. Now, a lot of times when we talk about this generosity with ourselves and taking care of ourselves, taking care of our bodies, taking care of our spirits, taking care of our minds, all of those things play into that. And a lot of times when you start talking about things of that nature, the book of Corinthians comes up. Because this verse, you've probably heard it before. It's probably been quoted and misquoted. But a lot of times, the words of Paul come up about how the body is a temple, right? And that verse does tend to get a little bit overused, I will tell you. It tends, like, we just kind of blanket that over everything about the body being the temple. We can blanket that as far as we want to stretch that verse. And I've heard it stretched that far. Now, what you need to know is when Paul's actually speaking about those verses in the book of Corinthians, you need to know the context in which he is speaking about them. So what it's actually directly relating to when he speaks about them is sexual sin. Now, that's interesting because that does actually tell us something about how we should take care of our body, because the reason that he says that the body is a temple and the sexual sin is so bad is because sexual sin is a sin against the body, right? See, what you can find in those verses and what you can apply universally from those verses is that this body is important to this life, right? We kind of need it. I don't know about you, I kind of need it. We kind of don't exist without it. So we do need this body in this life. And what happens is when you sin against the vehicle by which you live in this world, when you sin against that, it has dire consequences. And that's what Paul's talking about in the book of Corinthians. When he talks about this body being a temple, he is just telling you that you cannot sin against this. You need this thing, right? You need this. But where I want to point you when we're talking about taking care of ourselves and being generous to ourselves is I want to point you to the book of the book of Romans. I think I have that in your insert too. It says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God." Now listen to this. "This is your true and proper worship." See, what we often forget is this physical body, this shell. It encapsulates the mind and the spirit, doesn't it? It's what holds it in here. And see, it's kind of like if you, I'm big into gardening when I can be. I just don't have the time for it. But I'm big into gardening. And you know, when you get that, like, I love to grow tomatoes. That's one of my favorite vegetables. And you have a tomato and it's rotten on the outside, right? And you pick up that tomato, it's rotten on the outside. You don't even bother with it, do you? And the reason you don't bother with it and you don't try to save it and maybe just cut it off is because often when it starts rotting on the outside, you cut it open and it's black on the inside, right? So you already probably know that if it started to show signs of rotting on the outside, then the inside is probably compromised as well. So it's no good, you toss it and you move on. But see, the thing is that you don't really know when you see this rotten tomato sitting there whether the outside caused the inside or the inside caused the outside, right? You just know that they kind of go hand in hand together. And see, that's kind of the same thing about this shell, this body, is that if it's rotten on the outside, what happens is it gets rotten on the inside. And if it's rotten on the inside, then it rots on the outside. And sometimes you can't really tell which caused which, but it's rotten. Like that tomato. And that's what those words in Romans are saying, is that our body is a living sacrifice. And any of you who have gone through difficult times know that grief causes physical ailments, doesn't it? Sadness causes physical ailments. Pain causes physical ailments. These things don't exist separately. And so caring for this also cares for our spirits. And so we need to care for both things. See, being generous with ourselves allows us to nurture, protect our mind, body, and spirit. That's the kind of generosity with ourselves that we are looking for. So we need to be generous with each other. We need to be generous with ourselves. Now, the third one that's interesting, and I think I said we often think about the generosity to each other. We sometimes think about the generosity to ourselves. And I don't know how often we think about this generosity. See, we need to be generous to God. He's generous to us. Let's take a look at the book of Proverbs. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Now, see, we use this one a lot when we're talking about money again. There's that money thing that comes up, and we talk about this a lot, but let's talk about wealth biblically. Because wealth is a word that is used very often throughout the Bible, and I'll tell you what, not so often is it talking about being measured by currency, is it? True wealth. Remember the rich man? He found true wealth. He had lots of money. He wasn't wealthy, so said Jesus. See, what wealth is biblically is he's talking about abundance. When we talk about wealth, you talk about having abundance, and abundance can exist in many different crops of your life, right? He's talking about the wealth and the first fruit of your crops. You have lots of crops other than your bank account that you can have wealth in. See, you may have an abundance of money. That's good. Maybe you do, but maybe you have an abundance of time. Maybe you're newly retired and you're not quite sure what to do with this extra time you have. Maybe you have an abundance of talent. Maybe you are very skilled, very talented at something, and you have an abundance of that. Maybe you have an abundance of love. And I started thinking about this for myself, and you know what? I don't have a lot of time or money. I'll tell you that. Let's just lay that out there. I have no time and no money, ever. That's the way my life goes. So, that's not abundant in my life. But what is abundant in my life is I have talent. It took me a long time to actually say those words and recognize that in myself, but I have talent and probably a fair amount of it that I could use. I quite certainly have an abundance of love in my life. I've got all this. I've got a wonderful family, wonderful children. See, that's where my abundance exists. And for each of us, it's different. But when we're talking about giving, he wants you to give out of your wealth. And where your abundance is and what God is expecting of me is to give out of my abundance, where I have that wealth. And that's where I should be. And that's where I am expected by God to be generous. So see, we always think, being generous is just about being able to write these nice big checks or something like that, and it isn't. It isn't. It's about where your abundance is and giving out of that. He's looking for the sacrifice that you have. He wants you to be generous to him. He is generous to us. It says, honor the Lord with your wealth. It doesn't say honor the Lord with your lack, does it? With your wealth. So think about, where are you wealthy in your life? Because that's where God's expecting your generosity, in those areas that you are wealthy. Being generous to God. So if you missed those blanks, I'll do them one more time because I did them kind of quick. We need to be generous to each other. You need to be generous to yourself. And you need to be generous to God. And so, well, that's all good and fine and dandy. How are we supposed to do that, right? I told you a lot of what. I didn't tell you much of how, did I? And see, it's kind of difficult for us. Being generous is difficult for us. It's difficult to be generous to each other sometimes. It's even more difficult to be generous to ourselves, and I think it's the greatest difficulty to be generous to God. And so, why is that? Why is it so hard for us? We know it in our logical minds. We can speak it. We can say it. I'm a Christian. I should be generous. I should be kind. I should have a kind heart, right? We can say that, but why is it that we don't live it? You know, a couple weeks ago, David was up here, and he was talking about a 2-year-old child. Do you guys remember that? And he said if you hand a 2-year-old child a toy, and then you try to take it away from him, what's going to happen? Mine, right? And that's true of any 2-year-old child. It has nothing to do with their upbringing or whether you're raising them to be generous or not generous, right? It's in their nature. And what we do is we condition it out of them, right? We start teaching them that sharing is caring, right? And we start teaching those things so they learn. And that's what David was talking about. And see, I think that's one of the reasons that these things are so difficult for us, is because it's actually outside of our nature. We came into this world being selfish. And we're working against that from the time that even we're 2 years old. I think our culture also works against us a little bit when we look at generosity and being kind. I found it interesting, and you know, I love Cape Coral. I love Florida. I really do. So please don't take any offense to anything I'm going to say, because I actually love this area. I love this community. I truly do. But I had the opportunity to travel out to the Midwest a couple weeks ago. And what was interesting is, first of all, I'm kind of like a cowboy boot, kind of cowboy hat wearing, kind of cornfield growing kind of girl. I really am. At heart, that's me. And so I get out to Midwest America, and that's what you have, right? Cornfields for as far as you. I drove like 3.5 hours and never saw the end of this cornfield. It was just one cornfield going. But what really shocked me, and what I had to do, is I had to start kind of conditioning myself again, because when I got to my destination and I'm walking through, we stayed in a hotel, and I walked through the hotel, and we went out to eat a lot because you're away from home. And what I really recognized very quickly is I had to tell myself to be kind. Because I would walk in and people would be like, "Hi, how are you? How are you doing today? Where are you headed?" And I thought, why is he talking to me? In Florida, we don't talk to each other. As a matter of fact, I want to say I was there 5 days, and I don't know that I held open my own door once. And so what I had to do is I had to tell my brain is, "Oh, Teresa, stop. Be nice to them. Acknowledge them back." Because we kind of just go, don't we? And I don't know if it's just this culture, the kind of the big city life, or what it is, but I really did have to tell myself, I had to remind myself to be cordial, to be kind, to have these conversations. And I'll tell you what, oh my goodness gracious, did I have some of the best conversations. I met some of the coolest people. We sat and we had breakfast with a lady we didn't know. She was traveling with a band, and I learned all about that. The next day I talked to a couple, and they were truck driving together, and they told me all about that. And as I'm leaving, I'm thinking to myself, I need to do this at home. People are kind of cool. Their lives are kind of cool. But see, we're conditioned against that, right? As a matter of fact, you get too involved in somebody's business out in the grocery store or, out in the street, and they're going to tell you to mind your own business, aren't they? But people are cool. And so our culture is kind of conditioned against that. We just kind of focus in and go where we're going, and we don't look outside, right? And so we have to kind of change that. And then the other thing I think, the reason that we have such as difficulty getting to this condition of our heart that we want, this kindness that actually lives in there and breathes in there and grows in there, that's what we're looking for, that kindness in our hearts, is because our spirits are even kind of conditioned against it. And I want you to think about this for a little minute, or just for a minute, and I kind of question myself of whether I should say this or not, but I want you to think about this, because what we do, and what many of you have done, and I've sat in 101 classes, and some of you have said this, so if you've said this, I'm sorry, but some of you have, and what happens is when we go out and we're looking for a place to fill our spiritual needs, right? We want a church, because we all recognize that we need a church. We need a place where our needs can be filled, our spirits can be filled. So what we do is we get out this piece of paper and we write out a list, don't we, of what I need this church to do, right? And you write things like the kind of worship and the kind of preaching, right? You write this out, and this is the list of the kind of church that you need to have your spirit filled, right? So you have this checkoff list, and then you start off on your little adventure through Cape Coral, and you go church to church, and you see if you can mark this little checklist off to see if your spirit can get filled. But for just a moment, I want you to think about what would happen if you pulled out that little piece of paper and you sat down and you wrote everything about yourself that you could contribute to the church that you find in Cape Coral. What if it was about bringing your generosity? What if it was about bringing yourself into that church? What if it was about, you know what, that maybe they don't have the greatest worship team, but I'll tell you what, I'm a gifted singer. So I'm going to go find a church that doesn't have a good worship team, and I'm going to go sing. What if it's one that isn't very friendly and you just have a very big gift of compassion? What if you went and found that place that maybe isn't very friendly and you work to make it friendly, right? You see how we look at this the complete opposite way? Oh, that church's not friendly, not going there. Oh, that church has a terrible worship band, not going there. Oh, do you see what I'm saying? What if we just flip that around? And see, that's why this condition of our heart is so difficult, because we're in it for us. We're in it for us. Our culture's in it for us, and our nature is even telling it it's for us, right? So it's really difficult for us to step outside this and change the way our heart thinks and feels and is motivated. And see, we are people that we have learned to give out of abundance. That's what we do. That's kind of our way. We minister out of abundance. When I have extra time, I'll be in that ministry, right? We take care of ourselves out of abundance. When I have the more time or more money or more resources, I'll do what I need to take care of myself. But the funniest thing about that is that we live in a state of scarcity all the time. We never have enough. We're always looking for more, but yet we want to give out of abundance. See, God wants us to give out of those areas that we're wealthy. But because we carry this mindset of scarcity around with us, sometimes we don't even recognize that we're wealthy. We don't even see it. We are people who believe we don't have enough. And we do. And look at us. Look at us in comparison to the rest of this world. Even the poorest of us have a hand up on most of the world. And see, as a church, as an organization, because this church is an organization, so I'm speaking that way right now because I want to be careful. I hate that we use church and we use it interchangeably with the body. That's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about the structure, the church, not the body. See, what it is in this church, in this organization, it is our job in this community, in this place, to give you the tools that you need to combat these things, right? So that you can build your spirit and then improve this world. That's kind of the way we work. So that's what we are supposed to do here. This is why we exist. This is why I get up and come to work. This is why she gets up and comes to work. That's why David gets up and comes to work. It's because we are here to provide you the tools that you need to build that spirit. And see, one of the keys to living that abundant life we are looking for is that irrational generosity in all areas. And we want to help you find that. So get out your toolbox, because I'm going to fill it up this morning for you. Because there are ways that we can do this. We need to start working on this, and there's several ways that you can do this. I'm going to offer you a few. But it's between you and God. Go home and pray about this and figure out how it is that you're going to change that condition of your heart, because that's what it is. It's not a mindset. You know, we have this thought that if I just say or if I just tell myself I'm going to be generous, God knows. He knows when you're like, okay, well, I'll give this guy $1 because I have to. He knows the difference between that and, you know what, here, this is everything I have. He knows that. He knows the difference between, I got to get up and go worship today. And you know what? Good morning, God. I'm here to offer you my talents that you have given me. He knows the difference. So how do we condition ourselves? It's just our heart. That's all it is. We just kind of need to chisel through it. It's not your fault that it gets a little hardened. It's hard. It's hard to walk this world and not get hardened. It's hard. Gosh, look at what we see. Look at what we experience. So we're going to get our chisels out this morning. So how do we condition our heart for generosity? And this is one of Pastor David Rigby's most famous lines. First thing we have to do is we have to rewire your brain. Boy, he loves to say that, doesn't he? And he pulls that out of the book of Romans. It's in chapter 12, verse 2. It says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That is how you rewire your brain. And I'm sorry, but I only have one answer for that. Actually, I said there's lots of ways that you can condition your heart, but as far as rewiring your brain, there is only one way. Yeah. You have to read that book. You have to read that book. We have to be people that read this book. And see, the thing is people come to me, and maybe you're brand new to it, and you've never opened it up, and you're like, well, I don't know where to start. It's kind of like somebody who says, okay, I want to lose weight, but I don't know where to start. Well, you know what? Walk into your mailbox, if you're not already, would probably be good. Do something, right? Do anything. Cut out a soda one day a week. I don't know. Do something. And it's the same thing with this book. Do something rather than nothing. And what I've done for you is for the month of September, because see, I kind of like to make bold statements to you. We've been making these little soap cards, and they're kind of like bookmarks, so you can tuck them in your Bible. But the thing is you people aren't seeing them, so I made them nice and big this time. And I stuck them in your bulletin, so your bulletin's all awkward, and you have to say, what is this big, heavy piece of paper inside my bulletin? Well, this is one way that you read the Bible. There's lots of ways to read the Bible. Lots of ways to do that. You pick how you want to do that. Maybe if you're brand new, a lot of times people tell you the very first place to start is the book of John. Read John. Then go through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Read those. But here's another way. And this is a way that I use quite often. I actually teeter-totter through different ways of reading the Bible, but this is one of the ways. And what we're going to do in the month of September is we're going to look at the book of Philippians. And you see that you have SOAP here. Tells you how to go through it. And what you need is one of these. That is the best 50-cent investment you are going to make in your life. I promise you that. Right now they're on sale because school just started. So head down to Walmart and get yourself one of these. Because if you see what I have in this one, and this is one of my actual notebooks, that you see that I write in here every single day. And there's lots of reasons that I do this, but one of the reasons is the soap. Because you can walk through this scripture, you can see what God is doing in your life, and I'm telling you what, get yourself one of these notebooks and go back to it. Because one of the coolest things I found to do in my life is when I'm really down and I don't feel great, I go grab those notebooks and I start flipping through the pages, and I start taking account of all of the prayers that God has answered in my life. And you know what? Life doesn't seem so bad then. I do this so I remember, because a lot of times you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot the place I was in. I forgot about that. We forget the prayers we tell God. We're running around praying, and then he's answering them, and we forgot. We forgot we even prayed it. This helps you not forget. So here's your soap. It's nice and big. You'll find it. Even if you have a hard time reading, say I did the bottom in white so you could see it good. That's how you soap. That's one way to read your Bible. Do something. Second thing we need to do, if we want to condition our hearts for generosity, is we need to become mindful. We need to be mindful. Listen to the words of Peter. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for something to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of suffering. Be mindful. And this mindfulness comes in many areas in our lives. See, we kind of almost autopilot. We kind of get up every day, jump in the shower, get ready for work, grab our coffee, head out the door, make the drive, yell at some traffic, get to work, get annoyed by some coworkers, get back in the car, get annoyed with some more traffic, go home, make dinner, watch some TV, go to bed. And then the next day we get up and we do that again. And you see what happens is we stop being mindful. Satan loves this. Oh, he loves this. Because if I can just keep you running on autopilot, you're going to be of no good. You're just going to keep running on autopilot. Pretty soon it'll be 60 years later and you're going to say, what did I do? So we have to be mindful. Now I am going to talk about money. Because that's one of the things we're probably most mindless with. And I just realized this myself. I thought to myself the other day, I said, I get a paycheck, I pay some bills, I spend some money, and I wait for the next one. And then I get another paycheck, and I spend some bills, or I pay some bills, and I spend some money, and I wait for the next one. And it's this continuous thing. And see, here's the thing is that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but Satan's got strategy. Why don't we? If we're going to combat what he is doing, why don't we have a strategy back? Why aren't we strategic in what we do? Why do we run through paycheck after paycheck after paycheck with no strategy, no goal in mind, right? If you ask the average American what their financial goals are, they cannot mutter one to you. They don't have any. Retirement? That's a great goal. How are you going to get there, right? We need to be mindful. And especially in that area. The reason I bring that up is because we're getting ready to do a Dave Ramsey. You've got a Dave Ramsey. Again, many ways to do this. There are other programs that are great, but this is coming up. And as a matter of fact, I think, I've taught the class a couple times. I've taken the class. I've taught it. David's taken it, taught it a few times. Dave Emmerich, the one that's teaching it, I don't know, what's he on? 6, 7, 8 times, 9 times he's taught it now. And it's funny because, I feel like I need it. And see, it's not just in this area, but it's in all areas. Like, you almost have to go back and refresh yourself on some of this stuff, on everything you do. You have to go back and relearn it again. I actually just reread a book that I was forced to. I wasn't happy about it. I'm like, I already read that book years ago. But I'll tell you what, I read it again, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need this stuff in my life. It's Boundaries by Henry Cloud. I had realized that I knew this. I had all the information, but as years passed, I let those boundaries kind of slide, and here I am doing everything for everybody, killing myself again, right? And so I read that again because I was forced to, but really I wish it would have been my choice. And realized that I needed to get those lines set back up in my life. And it's the same thing with this Dave Ramsey stuff, is I might go sit in those classes when I can, because I need to get these lines set back up in my life. I know them. But you got to be reminded. Be mindful in everything. I wish I would add that to your notes. Be mindful in everything. I want you to write in everything after that. It's not just mindful. See, I'm coming up with good stuff right on the spot here. The last way that we condition our hearts for generosity is that we have to be spiritual. Oh, I know. We're all like, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we are. We're spiritual. Yes, we are. We're spiritual. We're so spiritual. Let me read this to you first. Let me read you this verse. Rejoice always, praying continually, giving thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Rejoice always. How many of you are rejoicing always? How many of you are praying continually? We know we're supposed to pray about everything. We know that, right? Actually, somebody just brought it up to me. We're going to start putting some prayer things in action here around here because we need to be praying continually. See, here's the thing. We need to be in constant prayer. Constant. I remember the way that I grew up, I didn't think it was right to ask God for silly things. I remember somebody a long time ago telling me how her and her husband prayed about the right house, whether they should buy a house or they should build a house. And I was in my early 20s at the time, and I wasn't really walking with the Lord real well. And I remember her saying that, and I thought, oh my gosh, why would you bother God with that? Like, he's got to feed starving people. There's people dying in Africa. Like, why are you asking him what house? But I have come to realize that he wants to be that involved in my life. He wants all of these little prayers. He wants this constant and actually uninterrupted conversation with you day and night. So if we're going to pray, and here's another thing, there's where that strategy comes in again. I'm going to talk about strategy. When we're praying, Satan's got a strategy against you. Why don't you have one against him? Why? He's strategically seeking to kill and destroy you. Strategically. Why aren't we in strategy and prayer? Why aren't we combating every last ounce that he wants to get against us? Cheryl said to me last week, she said, you know, Satan, I think he stopped sending us big white elephants because we recognize them now. So what he does instead is he sends fire ants. Because we know his strategy, but if he sends a little fire ant to creep on in and just bite a few people, right? Why are we not strategic? I'm reading actually in my women's group. This book is awesome. This is, it's for women. It's fervent. It's written by Priscilla Shirer, who, she was the star in that movie War Room. And it says a woman's battle plan for serious, specific, and strategic prayer. And see, this is the thing about the prayer. I get up every morning and I pray and I talk to God, and I absolutely will tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, I know he hears me. And if you get up every morning and you talk with God, and I'm going to tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, he hears you. However, there's something about two or more of us. There's something about that. It's written in the book, when two or more gather. There's something about that. And if we're going from Sunday to Sunday without anybody else with us, and just trying to rely on our own prayers, we're missing something. We're missing some. We need more than just us. Yeah, good job. But nobody has ever meant to battle this war alone. He didn't send a lone soldier. He sent an army. And we should gather together as an army to pray. So if you're running from Sunday to Sunday and you're not stopping one time between that Sunday and that other Sunday to pray with somebody else, then you need to find a place to do that. You need to find a place to do that. I don't care if you have some people come over to your home. I don't care if you find some people at work who pray. Whatever you want to do. We have groups, come to that. You have to do something. Again, do something. You have to do something. You cannot just pray on Sunday morning when we're here. You cannot also just pray by yourself. You need partners in your prayer. And I'm telling you, it's just crazy what God starts to do. He starts to do that. I picked this book for my class because, I needed something and it sounded really good, and I really like prayer, so it sounded good. So I picked this book, and I love the author, and I knew whatever she wrote would be good. But it's so funny because what I'm teaching them on Sunday, or on last Wednesday, I was teaching this class. And this book actually talks about the 10 most common strategies of Satan. So she went around and she polled a bunch of women, and she said, how does Satan attack your life? And out of all of these women that she polled, I think it was thousands, it was quite a big set of people that she went through and she checked with to see how Satan comes against them. She came up with 10 common ways. And it's funny, every time I pull out this book and I start reading the ways that Satan attacks you, these 10 common ways, somebody's like, oh yeah, woo. Every time I read it, somebody is like, the light bulb comes on. Because here's the thing about Satan. He has no new tricks. He does things the way he's always done things, and he continues to do things, and he knows what takes us down. Let's look at it. He's had a lot of experience. He's been hanging around for a while, right? So he knows what takes us down. He knows what gets us back. He knows what ones work and what doesn't work. And what's funny is I'm sitting dealing with a personal issue this past week after I had taught this class. I think it was Thursday or Friday. And I sat down, and there was this series of circumstances that were not good in my life, and with not between me and my husband, but something my husband and I were trying to do, and we were just getting so much resistance. And I said to my husband at one point, I said, is this God trying to stop us from moving forward, or is this Satan trying to derail us? And I didn't know, and so I'm sitting early in the morning, 5 a.m. with my coffee, and I'm like, God, and I write it out. I actually wrote it out right in this book that I brought with me this morning. I actually wrote it out. Oh my goodness, I'm going to read it because I have it. I actually wrote out these words. Where is it at? Where is it at? Of course, I'm not going to be able to find it right now when I need it, but I know it's in here. But I wrote these words. I said, what is it? Is it you? Are you trying to stop us? Are we making a big mistake? Or is it Satan? And all of a sudden, this book came into my mind. And I went through and I started reading the 10 strategies again of Satan. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Because this whole situation we're looking at has every single marking of one of his 10 strategies. That's what God does with this stuff when we start praying together. Answers come in forms that you wouldn't even expect. And so now I know I am doing the right thing. Satan's just not happy about it. So that's fine. We'll keep moving, right? But I can't tell you the pressure that released when I understood that. And the reason that I understood that is because I gathered together with these ladies and I'm trying to teach them something. And so something that I was just trying to do out of the generosity in my heart with my time, which is not one of my wealth. Remember, I told you that, but still with my time. What I'm trying to do, and God's answering my prayers through it. You see, that's how he works. So if you're running Sunday to Sunday and you don't have anybody with you and you're not praying with somebody or another, find somebody. Because we really need you to rewire your brain. We need you to be mindful in everything. And we need to be spiritual people.